Hey y'all, I'm Cece, and today I am here to talk about my 2020 Ranked and Reviewed. So this is a video I've been doing for a couple of years now. Basically, I like to get to the end of a year and talk about all of the new releases that I've read over the last 12 months. Last year, I read a grand total of 22 2020 releases, and in this video I'm going to be ranking all 22 of them from my least favorite to my most favorite, and for each of these I'm going to let you know the age group of the book and how I acquired the book, as well as a quick summary and quick review. Hopefully this helps let you know which 2020 releases I personally thought were worth it. I talk about anticipated releases so often, and I really like that this is a space where I can talk about which of my anticipated releases I actually got to and what I ultimately thought of them. But before we get into all of that, I wanted to tell you a bit more about this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes for creative and curious minds. Skillshare classes cover so many different topics. In the past year alone, have talked about classes in productivity, in video production, in graphic design, and there are so many more. I really wanted to shout out a class today called Revolutionary Self-Care. This is by Chidera, who is also known as the Slumflower online. I know lately I have been having a very hard time emphasizing self-care and figuring out what self-care even looks like for me, and I absolutely loved this class for that. I really encourage you to check out this class or one of the many other classes that Skillshare has to offer. Premium membership gives you unlimited access to all of Skillshare's classes, and that premium subscription works out to be less than $10 a month annually. Plus, the first 1,000 people who click the link in my description are going to get a free trial of that premium membership, so definitely check out that link. Take a look at all of the classes Skillshare has to offer. Thank you so much again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, let's talk about books. So in 2020, I read a total of 63 books, and like I said, 22 of those were new releases. Also, I will have a 2020 reading stats video coming eventually. Thank you so much to all of you who said that was something you were interested in. I'm only giving you a couple of statistics for these 22 books specifically. There will be a lot more in that future video. Of all of the new releases that I read, the majority of them were contemporary or contemporary romance genre-wise, and overwhelmingly the method that I received most of these books from was publishers sending me early copies. But I will let you know on every single one of these exactly how I acquired the book, so there's some transparency there. Last note, if you want to look at trigger warnings for all of these books, because some of them do explore some very dark topics, trigger warnings are going to be listed at the bottom of my description, so you can scroll all the way down there for that. But just a warning, it's going to spoil the order that this video is in, because I'm going to be talking about my least favorite books first, and then working up to my favorite 2020 release. I hope that all makes sense. Without further ado, let's jump into these 2020 books, starting with my least favorite release of last year. Unfortunately, my least favorite release has to be Witches of Ash and Ruin by E. Latimer. This is a YA fantasy, and I received this copy via the publisher. So this is set in Ireland, and it follows a bisexual witch who was recently outed in her small town. She also has OCD, but really her ultimate goal is just to ascend and become a full witch. Unfortunately, that's kind of derailed by a couple of local murders and a new coven coming into town. The biggest issue with this book is that it is bogged down by way too many point of view characters, which means there's no suspense and all of the reveals are completely undercut. I did not like the romance, I didn't really care for most of the characters, and I didn't love that this was clearly a lead into a series when it was billed, at least to me, as a standalone. Did not like reading this. It was my least favorite release of the year. Next up, we have Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer. This is, I don't even know which book in the Twilight Saga. It's the first book retold. So I think it's book 5, but is it book 1.5? Who's to say? This is a YA paranormal romance, and I bought this copy myself. I think that this appealed to me from a nostalgia standpoint. I was a Twilight-obsessed teen, and I remember Midnight Sun, so I wanted to read this. Ultimately, I think it's pretty unnecessary. It's way too long, Edward talks and bitches and moans way too much. There are some fun little, like, tidbits you can learn if you're a big fan of the series, but that's it. And I'm done talking about this now. But I do want to encourage you to check out the links in the description down below. I am going to leave them there for you to peruse. There you can learn a little bit more about the real-life Quileute tribe who Stephenie Meyer used in her books. Ultimately, I want to encourage people to look into how they can support the Quileute tribe. They're struggling right now to relocate, so definitely look into that. I'm a Washington resident. It's important to me for that reason, but also because it should be important in general, so please not only look into donating, but learn more about the situation itself. I really, really encourage you to. Okay, moving on. Next, I want to talk about A Beginning at the End by Mike Chen. This is an adult release, sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, and this copy was originally sent to me via the publisher. I had an ARC that I've just since handed off to someone else. This is set a few years post-pandemic related apocalypse that wiped out 90% of the population. And I need you to know that this was written a while ago, and I read it in January of 2020, so completely unawares. It was read in a simpler time. I think this was way too slow moving, and I totally understood why it was. It was supposed to be a character study, but ultimately, because all of the conflicts could have been resolved by a character just communicating one thing, it made it really difficult to care about the characters in that slow-moving plot. But I think it was inventive and interesting, and I liked how it looked at a world in the future post-pandemic, considering how closely it was written to us. It was complex. It was complex. I'm moving on. Next up we have I Know You Know Who I Am, Stories by Peter Kispert. This is a short story collection that's mostly microfiction, so stories that are like 2 pages in length. They can be like a little longer, a little shorter, but that's kind of it. And every single story in this collection follows a queer main character, for the most part gay men, but there is one story narrated by a sapphic woman. The biggest issue with this is that it's repetitive as hell. If you read the first 5 stories, you've kind of read the whole collection. Like, it just keeps hitting you over the head with the same themes again and again and again. It just feels repetitive, but there are a few really standout stories that work and try to make up for it. If you want to know more, I have done a full Goodreads review where I discuss every single story in this collection, and I'm going to link that in the description down below. Next, we have Of Curses and Kisses by Sandhya Menon. This is a YA book, and it was sent to me via the publisher. This is a modern-day retelling of Beauty and the Beast set at a boarding school that's for the children of, like, dignitaries, nobles, royalty, presidents, actors, anyone relevant. It's the kids of those people. There's also a is it magic or maybe isn't it magic element. I don't think that this needed to have Gray's point of view. It had both of the characters' points of view, and I liked Jaya a lot. I didn't need to hear from Gray. He's just this brooding, whiny bad boy, and I don't care because I'm a lesbian. I'm sorry. It felt aggressively heterosexual, and that's fine. It just didn't hold my interest. I loved seeing the, like, Beauty and the Beast story elements because I always love a retelling. There were just elements of this that didn't quite work for me. Next up, we have This Town Sleeps by Dennis E. Staples. This is adult fiction, and I was originally sent a finished copy by the publisher, and I've since sent this copy off to someone else. This follows an Ojibwa man in his mid-20s who has just entered into this relationship with a former classmate, and this classmate is super closeted, and he's white. And this is exploring our main character, Marion, his relationship, and there is the mystery of a murder in this community's past and how it is still kind of haunting certain members of the community. Again, my biggest issue with this book is that there were too many points of view. I had that problem a lot at the beginning of last year. And maybe it wasn't even that there were too many points of view, it's just that I had a hard time with how the points of view were split up because we were following Marion for so long, and then the portion of the book that wasn't from his perspective was all one chunk, or almost one chunk. So there was just so much time without Marion, and when that was the stuff I liked more, it just made that middle bit not work as well for me. The next book I'm going to talk about is Rick by Alex Gino. This is, I think, the only middle grade book on this list, and this copy was sent to me via the publisher. This is a companion novel to the book George, and this follows a boy named Rick who is just starting into middle school, and he's starting to feel like his classmates are feeling things he isn't. They're talking about kissing, they're talking about dating, and Rick doesn't care about any of that. And part of what helps him learn from that is attending the middle school's Rainbow Spectrum Club, which is this book's version of a GSA. This is cute and it's super uplifting. I think it focuses on one storyline way too much. There's an element with Rick and his best friend that I think is just less fleshed out, and I would have loved to see more pages dedicated to the storylines that worked better. However, I think this book would be absolutely perfect for like a middle school library or just a library in general, because there's so much intro level knowledge about different identity words, pronouns, romantic versus sexual orientations, what it means to be trans, different identities within the trans umbrella, and of course the main character exploring if he is maybe ace or aro, or maybe he's both of those things. So while I think that one storyline just wasn't as strong, I do feel like this book is still going to have so much power in so many kids' lives. I'm really excited for kids to learn more from Rick about themselves and maybe their friends. Next we have Something to Talk About by Meryl Wilsner. This is an adult romance, and I got this copy via Arcs for Trade. The basic premise of this book is that it is about an actress and her assistant, and they attend a red carpet event together and are photographed together in a way that the press portrays as kind of intimate, so everyone thinks the two of them are dating. And it kind of comes at a really bad time, at least professionally, in both of these women's lives, and so you're kind of moving forward from that. I think this had a lot of potential, and it's like a super slow burn. It isn't very steamy, and I think the slow burn might be a little too slow for some people. I think I would have liked this less if I wasn't obsessed with stories about fame and sexuality, which is what this is. Plus, one of the main characters has asthma, and that's like a thing that's frequently reflected upon, and it was really cool to see that representation as well. Another romance book, we have Meet Cute Club by Jack Harbin. This was sent to me via the author, and it is a adult romance. This follows a character named Jordan who has a romance book club that he's worried is dwindling, and then there's this new guy at his favorite local bookstore who is kind of like giving him a hard time for reading the romance books, and then he starts coming to the romance book club anyway. So it's a good annoying guy becomes a maybe love interest romance. This is teeth-achingly cute, like it's adorable, and it's definitely not steamy at all. It's just ultimately it's very short, but I love a good bookish romance, and it absolutely piqued my interest to read more of Jack Harbin's work, so I think it's absolutely worth it for that as well. Next, I want to talk about Yellow Jessamine by Caitlin Starling. This is adult. It is historical fantasy horror, and I was sent an early e-copy by the publisher on NetGalley. So this is about a woman from this closed-off community. This woman has inherited a shipping company from her father, and it's following that and the community that's dwindling, but ultimately it's about this deadly plague that has made itself known, and the main character is trying to solve the mystery of this plague because she has a history in botany, and that becomes part of it, and the mystery gets bigger and bloodier, and yeah. This is super atmospheric, but I think it introduces you to the world too quickly. It's a novella, and it feels like you're kind of thrust into the story at the halfway mark. So you have to jump into a lot of concepts really quickly in order to appreciate what's even happening. However, the way that Caitlin Starling writes horror and queer attraction between women is like phenomenal, because she writes about like fucked up sapphic love, and horror mixed with the gays is a personal favorite of mine. So while this was a little confusing, it was still atmospheric and great, and we stand like repressed lesbian horror fantasy representation. The next book we have is The Seep by Chana Porter. This is adult sci-fi and it was sent to me via the publisher. So this is about the aftermath of a gentle alien invasion of this alien entity called the Seep. And the Seep connects everyone and moves towards building a utopia of like kindness without hierarchies, embracing nature and joy. Basically with the Seep anything is possible, and we're following a woman named Trina in this book. She is 50 years old, I believe, at the beginning of the book. She's lived this full life with her wife Deba, and then Deba decides she wants to be reborn as a baby and she wants to re-experience life, and this has left Trina feeling completely alone and abandoned. It's about grief and community and about change, and it's very, very weird. This book has a very surreal tone. I was expecting it to be more like Annihilation, and I think this leaned to the absurd in certain elements more than the like fucked up mysterious. It's kind of meandering, it could have been handled better, and it is not on voices for either the trans or native rep, but as a story about grief and people not taking certain kinds of grief seriously, it just really hit home for me. Alright, so from this point forward, I have given all of these books at least 4 out of 5 stars, which means I can pretty safely say I recommend everything from here on out. The last few I've talked about were 3 and 3.5 star books, and I really want to leave that up to you. It's why I gave you kind of like a good and a bad. But from here on out, I truly recommend all of these. So next we have Post-Colonial Love Poem by Natalie Diaz. This is a collection that explores many different types of love, familial love, romantic love specifically for Natalie's brother, love of the land, love of queer bodies, of brown bodies. It explores a really deep connection between Indigenous people and the land itself. It's also deeply queer, like I said, and a celebration of queer love and queer intimacy. I kind of went on a little longer with the summary because I think that that's gonna do better than a review for me on this. There are a lot of concepts in this poetry collection that go way over my head because Natalie's use of language is just incredible. It is so expansive and there's so much here to just sift through. And I was so fascinated by the ideas of colonization of the body and how Natalie was working through that. So, like, there's a lot here. It's very complex as a poetry collection, but I loved it. Next we have Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is adult historical, like, gothic horror, and I bought this copy. This is gothic horror set in the 1950s in Mexico, and it follows a woman named Noemi who has received this very frightening letter from her recently married cousin. And so Noemi rushes to the Mexican countryside, to the place where her cousin now lives, and once she gets there, she discovers that there are definitely sinister things happening in this house, and she stays to investigate and to care for her cousin. This is a slow burn. It really amps up the creep factor as you go along, and the conclusion is like batshit, but also fabulous. I picked this book up because I wanted gothic horror. I wanted something to give me the feel of classic gothic horror, and that's exactly what I got. It's a slow building dread. It's the knowledge that there's something underneath the surface that you're not seeing, and that's what's frightening. And I think this did all of that perfectly. It's atmospheric and fabulous. I just think, like, it was such a slow burn that the ending comes across as really, really, really wild. And I feel like if there had been slightly more time dedicated to that conclusion, it was almost there. But I still loved this. I read it right after watching The Haunting of Bly Manor, and I had a great time reading it. Moving on, we have Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. This is an adult slasher, or it's like a send-up to slashers. It's adult horror, and this copy was sent to me via the publisher, and it is about a prank at a movie theater that goes wrong, and then a whole lot of death. This, like many other books that I've talked about is deeply weird, but it does very, very cool things with the narrative style, and I can't talk about some of the other stuff it does because there's so much about this that's, you have to experience it. Like, it takes you on a ride, especially in the last few pages. I think it's a journey worth going on. I've never read a book that had what this had tonally. It was just completely wild, and I really enjoyed reading it. Next we have The Fire Never Goes Out by Noelle Stevenson. This is YA, it is nonfiction, it's a memoir, and I was sent a copy via the publisher. I also pre-ordered a copy. Noelle Stevenson is the creator of several comics and graphic novels I love, Nimona, Lumberjanes. They're the creator of the She-Ra series, and this is a collection of Noelle's comics over the past 10 years or so, going through their explorations of mental health, meeting their current partner. I've loved Noelle for years, and I love the way, I love the way he talks about mental health. It just rings so true to me in my heart and soul. I love this, highly recommend. Next, You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. This is a YA contemporary, and I received this copy via the publisher. This is about a girl named Liz Leidy who, after she does not get the scholarship that she needs to go to school to get out of her small town, she basically decides to swing for the wildest and only option, which is to enter into the running for prom queen, because the prom king and queen get a scholarship every year from her school. So she's thrust into the world of prom royalty, and while she is there, she happens to meet a girl named Mac who is also running, and that adds some more complexity to the equation. This handles so many topics so incredibly well, like masterfully handled elements of race, sexuality, economic inequality, toxic friendships, coming of age, first queer romance, coming out, being yourself. Like, it's a source of simple joy, but it's also an exploration of all of these different things about what it means to be Black and queer and poor in middle America. Plus, it's a book that openly and consistently questions Eurocentric beauty standards. It's just really, really beautiful and excellent, and absolutely worth your time. Absolutely was worth mine. Next we have Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This is a YA paranormal fantasy, and I received an ARC from the publisher, but I purchased this hardcover myself. This is about a Latinx trans boy named Yadriel who sets out to prove to his family that he is a brujo by completing his coming-of-age ceremony on his own. What he ends up with is a half-completed ceremony, an annoying ghost named Julian, who is now following him around, who is determined to figure out how he died, and the knowledge that the more time Julian and Yadriel spend together, the less Yadriel wants Julian to leave. This book makes me feel the way fan fiction feels, like safe and at home and loved. It employs tropes while managing to surprise you, and it builds up an absolutely kick-ass romance that you will go feral for. This was one of the biggest YA books of 2020 for a reason, and I loved it. These last 5 books I rated 5 stars, and I covered all 5 of them in my favorite books of the year video, so if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts, you can check that out. First we have Felix Ever After by Kaysen Callender. This is a YA contemporary, and this copy was sent to me via the publisher. This is about Felix. He goes to this art school in New York, and he's struggling dealing with the fact that he's not sure he's ever going to get this whirlwind romance. He is unsure about his current relationship with his dad, and he is the victim of transphobic bullying at school. And on top of that, he's maybe dealing with a revenge-driven love triangle situation? I love when a book helps me, like, rediscover why I love a particular age group or genre, and that's absolutely what Felix Ever After did for me. Queer YA contemporary is obviously my jam, always and forever, and I feel like this book hit every single point as to why that is. The way this book made me feel is the feeling that I'm just, like, always chasing. It'll make you sob on one page, laugh out loud the next, it'll fill your heart with queer love. Also, demi boy rep. Main character is a demi boy. Hell yeah. Next we have Homie by Dana Smith. This is a poetry collection that I purchased myself. Mostly this collection is a love letter to all different kinds of friendship, but it is also about what it means to exist in a world when you live in a body defined by queerness, by race, and by diagnosis. This is like captivating. It completely blew me away on every single page. This is about the friends we have. It's also about a friend that Dana's lost. It's full of so much love and hope, but also really hits on so many hard elements, and I am positive I'm going to continue to read and love Dana's work like from here on out forever. This is just superb. Okay, top 3. Let's do it. Last 3. Check Please, Book 2, Sticks and Scones by Ngozi Ukazu. This is the second and concluding book in the Check Please series, which follows a former figure skater named Eric Biddle, who is now a hockey player, and this series follows his 4 years at Samwell University. I read the entire final comic of Check Please, smiling ear to ear while sobbing, and I think that that is a perfect summary of my emotions regarding this whole series. Second to last, we have Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a YA novel in verse that I bought myself. This book follows 2 sisters who didn't know the other existed until a plane goes down between New York and the Dominican Republic that their father was on. Yet another book that kicked my ass emotionally. I think this book nails a lot about grief and explores a really complicated sister relationship expertly. One of the main characters is sapphic and has a girlfriend from the beginning of the book. There are discussions of economic disparity and how that economic disparity shows up from New York to the Dominican Republic. And it's also about the ways that people start to interact with women's bodies differently from a very young age. The way that you get a distinct voice for each of these girls, the way that you get to explore their dad and them and their families, it's just amazing. And finally, the last 2020 release that I'm going to talk about, my favorite 2020 release, is Real Life by Brandon Taylor. This is not a surprise, I'm sure. This follows Wallace, a black gay biochem student who is attending this unnamed Midwestern university. He is originally from Alabama, and this is set over one weekend and explores race, sexuality, grief. It's very consciously about the whiteness within academia and in general how academia interacts with all of the different levels of Wallace's life, as well as lingering effects of grief and how grief changes in unexpected ways. Look, if you're gonna read this book, just get ready to be sad as fuck, but in a way that I think works. It's beautifully written and so emotional, and like there were so many moments reading this book where I had to stop, underline a phrase, and then just sit there and think about it because it would completely take my breath away. But that happened frequently, and this is a debut. But I do want to emphasize again that all trigger warnings for these books are going to be listed down in the description below. Particularly for this, I know a lot of people are not aware of some of the very, very triggering content that occurs, so please check out that info down in the description. However, like I said, I gave this like 5 stars. It's superb literary fiction, and I can't wait to see what Brandon Taylor does next. Okay, y'all, that's it. Those are the 2020 releases that I read in 2020. I hope this helped all of you a little bit in determining which releases maybe you think are worth it. Please tell me about your very favorite 2020 release down in the comments below. I want to hear about which release came out last year that just completely blew you away, so I know which ones I can't miss going forward. I just want to say thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!